this computer. Okay. Mm, okay, it's 7:02 from my clock, so to value the time of everybody, we will actually start. So, those who have just joined, we will welcome Brian from Manila, Philippines. He's the Global Chapters Chair of SIGCHI. Um, uh, but before that, those who are new to Colombo SIGCHI chapter, I've shared this last time as well, but I see one or two new faces. So if you don't know what is Colombo SIGCHI, let me share my screen or my slides. And then show you. This is not a really big one, but just to share. So Colombo SIGCHI is actually a part of SIGCHI, Special Interest Group for Computer-Human Interaction, by actually from ACM. We inaugurated our chapter in 2021. Actually, after a few years, actually, we have been dormant for past 1 year, but now we founded with the key members from University of Colombo School of Computing and SLIIT in Sri Lanka and University of Moratuwa. The time that it was inaugurated, I was at University of Moratuwa as the founding chair. And then we had several universities collaborated in finding this chapter together. And then we had many events organized through our chapter. For example, like one of the key event that I can tell is the initiative that where you can find in our Medium channel, get to know about the Sri Lankan HCI researcher, because HCI, human computer interaction, is not very common in Sri Lanka, not just Sri Lanka, but also from the South Asia aspects as well. So we brought few keynote speakers or key speakers to share research ideas. For example, one is Pranam. You can see he's from Stanford, and but being in IIT in India, he shared a lot how he learned about HCI research while moving to elite universities. And also we conducted several sub-sessions in our main conferences. Like in Sri Lanka, we have a flagship conference called ICTR. We had a special session for HCI from that, and also we kind of had a one key event for research sharing. As actually it's a research showcase. We conducted it fully online, and it was really successful, and we want to do that again. But with that, actually we had about like 23 key papers that we shared. And then last week we had Richa coming to speak to us, because Richa has been in the field for more than 10 years, and we have worked close with her, and she's a key member in India HCI, and then India HCI for professionals. So we are learning from how they are conducting HCI research. And as a second event, actually Brian was scheduled as the first, but we had to postpone because he had a event that he had to take part. And today, let's welcome Brian again. Looking forward to hearing from Brian. Actually, let me unshare so this mic is for Brian. Maybe what we will do is, like, we have a bit of people online. we will, ask Brian to share his views and give his talk. And once you have the screen, Brian, feel free to stop at any time and ask questions, or, make yourself free to lead the session, and we will either take the questions at the end or in the middle as we wish. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Dilrukshi. Is it okay if I open my camera and I think
Of
I need
course,
permission first.
we would really like to see your face so that but it's nighttime, but it's totally okay.
Yes,
And
like
yeah,
that,
just to make sure that you are a real human, not an agent speaking on
of course.
behalf. Yes.
I think the settings is disabled
Oh,
mm,
so
for the camera, I think.
allow. And I should make you a host too, because you have to share the screen. So can you check now?
Yes, I can share my screen.
Yes. Okay.
Great. Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's also evening in my time here in the Philippines. And thank you, Dilrukshi, for inviting me over to Colombo HCI chapter. Um, Dilokshi already introduced me. So again, I'm Brian Paul V. Samson from De La Salle University in the Philippines, and this evening I'm gonna share with you how what kinds of research, HI research we're doing back here in the Philippines, and how are we teaching HCI to our students to make sure that we get to grow the research portfolio of our country. All right, so a little bit about me. So I'm an associate professor of computer science and informatics in my university, again, De La Salle University. And I currently lead the Human X Interactions Lab. So in the publication material, I think it was the name mentioned was the old name. We kind of rebranded recently, and that's fine. So we rebranded. We call ourselves now as Human X Interactions Lab, or HXIL. Um, to basically cover the breadth of HCI research that we are doing in the lab. Because later I will show you the other people who are working with me. And then at the same time, I also lead as executive director the Dr. Andrew L. Tan Data Science Institute. So it's one of the um, research institutes of our university that's focused on data science and artificial intelligence. So in terms of research, I try as much as I can to marry HCI, data science, and civic technology, and complex systems, actually, that's it. So I try to marry those for different fields in coming up with solutions for different problems that we encounter locally. Um, all right. So when it comes to impact area, so I do HR research, data science research, applied data science, complex systems research. But they are all applied in the areas of mobility and transportation. I am a commuter. I don't own a car. I don't even have a driver's license. So I am very much invested in the different challenges that we face as commuters in the country. We don't have a very advanced public transportation system, very much like the rest of the global south, I guess. So that's one of the key areas that I'm working on, even applying HCI in transportation. Yeah, also in disaster preparedness and in online communities, because as you know, the Philippines is one of the most active population in the internet. We are very much engaged, especially we have for K-pop idols, it's usually the Filipinos that comprise a large, uh, I guess, a large part of their fans. Filipinos are very much active online. Um, so that's why I'm very interested as well in learning the internet. So a little bit about our lab. So the Human X Interactions Lab is an interdisciplinary research lab under our college, and we have been previously known as the Center for Complexity and Technologies. So now, the reason why we call ourselves Humanex is because we try to cover as much as possible the different HCI research, because we're still growing our portfolio here in the country. So we're trying to cover as much breadth as we can. So some of us are doing research on human-computer interaction, human-machine, human building, human AI interaction, human-drone interaction. Okay. So that's why we call ourselves collectively as the Human X Interactions Lab. X can be anything. So yeah, basically that. And these are the people working with me. Probably Dirushi, know some of them by face. So that's me on the very left. And then beside me is Jordan Deha. Jordan Deha has been active in organizing large conferences. So last year and the previous year, the year before that, he was one of the chairs for the Global Plaza at Kai in Japan and in Hawaii. But he is part of our lab in the Philippines. And then the third person is Austin Fernandez. He is currently working on basically work and productivity kind of research, flow, state of flow, etc. Jordan is more working on XR, AR, VR, XR, and then drones as well. All right, so how do we do research in HumanX? So I'm gonna go through just some of the projects that we've done so far, and there's many more because one thing that you should know about our lab is we usually have the largest portion of students from our CS program. So there are many CS labs in our department, but many, almost 30% of those students come to our lab. We have become one of the popular destinations of students when it comes to doing their final year thesis. So I'm gonna go through some of the projects under the following themes. So the first one is augmented humans, then on human AI interaction, usable security and privacy, human-centered mobility, human-centered health and well-being, and finally reimagining the digital sphere. And these are basically the different research programs that I run under the HumanX Interactions Lab. So let's start with the augmented humans. The main question that we're trying to answer here is how might we augment human capacities through new interaction techniques and interactive systems. One example of this one, a lot of the projects that we're doing right now is related to goal attainment. So we're building different solutions, applying different goal attainment theories in designing for various contexts. So for example, this one, financial well-being. So how might we help users better achieve their financial goals? Because if you look at many applications right now, they're just asking you in very simple to write in very simple text what's your goal, and then basically they just leave you after that. They don't necessarily help you achieve those goals. Yes, they give functionalities to track, but that's the most they can actually provide. So for this project, we try to make sure that we try to apply the long-term goal attainment theory to make sure that we get to guide our users in achieving their goals, and at the same time helping them easily track their finances. And then for this one, we wanted to, because right now there's for example, students, right? Students typically consume long form videos, lectures, right? Hours long of video. So, but right now, scrubbing through videos or finding information in videos in long form are kind of difficult. So in YouTube, they have features such as sections or chapters, which you can put manually. In other tools such as Loom, it can generate the sections for you automatically based on what you're saying. So for this project, we kind of took inspiration from what Loom is doing. So we wanted to build a tool that can help people find information faster in long form videos by automatically coming up with these sections based on what is being talked about in the video. And then when it comes to human AI interaction, our main question is about how can we leverage modern AI models in performing high-level tasks and in generating creative outputs. So one specific project that we did recently is in helping novice developers learn test-driven development practice. And so right now, how developers use LLMs is basically they prompt it to give the code, right? But if you are a novice developer, that's not necessarily advised because you don't get to learn the skill yourself. You just learn to rely on the AI tool. So what we did here for this specific IDE extension is um, the extension just gives suggestions for what unit tests you can write next. So it reads your current code and then it also reads the current file where you put all of the unit tests. It will not give you the actual code for the unit test, but it will tell you based on what you have written so far, what could be the next step for you to write. Next test, unit test for you to write. So it's basically a leveraging. And this one is actually inspired by the work um, uh, from student researchers in KAIST under Juho Kim's lab. So for this one, so the main question that we tried to answer is improving how teams collaborate and design remote. So imagine that you have this what do you call this? Like a mood board of sorts. No? So you put all of the different images that you consider as inspiration for whatever you're making at the moment. So let's say you want to make a digital art and you have several images for inspiration. And what we did here is we tried to design this tool to allow different people to collaborate so they can add their own images and they can also vote on different aspects of the images that are already added in the mood board to be considered for creating sketches. So one really nice thing that we liked from the work of Juho Kim's lab is in their work they only ended by showing the artist's sketches. They did not create the digital art. The LLMs or the generative AI did not produce the digital art for the user. So they ended by producing sketches and then they left the actual creation of the digital art to the artist so that they can own the work and not the AI. So there. So but the main context here is more on a collaborative aspect. So how do you design that when different people have different things that they want to prioritize in the final output. All right, next is usable security and privacy. So how might we design intuitive security and privacy mechanisms in data-sensitive context? One example of this is we have a lot of vloggers in the university. I think among the Philippine universities, we have a large population of vloggers. Even first-year students, you see them going around campus filming themselves. But that has become a problem for other students. You know? So most many times have happened wherein these student vloggers have tried to record videos inside classrooms, and other students did not like it. So the question that we ask here is how might we allow bystanders to opt out? No? So because if you're a vlogger, you just point your camera anywhere. You don't really care who you're capturing in the videos. But for those who actually notice that they're being captured, how do they signal to the camera or to the person taking the video that they don't want to be part of the video? No, I mean, of course, they can tell the person, they can that they can confront, but culturally, Filipinos are not confrontational. So that's one thing that you also have to learn. Um, we are not the kind of people who will go to you and tell you that there is something wrong or that you don't like them. So this is one subtle way of us. So how can we subtly tell the vlogger that we don't want to be part? So one of the things that they did in the study is they first did an elicitation wherein they tried to ask people, okay, so if this is the situation, they tried to act it out. Can you show me how you would, for example, using gestures, how you would not want to be part of the video. So some people faced their so they covered their faces. Some of them did the wave. Some of them did this or whatever. So they basically did that simple need elicitation study, and then they developed this prototype that can detect the gestures that were commonly seen from the elicitation study, and then um, the plan is to actually integrate this into a video editing tool so that when the video is uploaded and these gestures are detected, those parts will automatically be flagged by the tool so that the vlogger or the editor can just blur the faces of the people in those parts of the video. So very straightforward. Um, yes, so that's one. And then the second is using gestures for authentication. So we tried to come up with an easy way to register very personalized gestures. I mean, gesture recognition is not very new, okay? But there's no efficient way right now of registering personalized gestures that can be used to authenticate you, especially in very, for example, in hospital contexts, because sometimes when you're in a hospital, you have to make sure that your hands are always clean so you're not touching walls or whatever. So if you want to authenticate, but probably your hands are dirty or maybe you're holding something, so can you just use gestures to authenticate? So that's one. And then when it comes to human-centered mobility, the main question that we try to answer in our lab is how might we design systems that promote and support efficient, delightful, and dignified mobility? So the highlight there is actually dignified. So this project, we tried to the main question that we try to answer here is how might we provide comfortable shaded walking paths. Now, if you use Google Maps right now and you ask it to give you a walking path from point A to point B, it will just use the road information and just create a path between point A to B. But here, what we wanted to consider is, okay, can we create a path for commuters that maximizes the amount of shade? No? So we used a lot of CV models to estimate the heights of buildings, and then I used another tool to estimate the shadows, and then using all of those information, integrate that into a routing algorithm so that it can create these paths for users. And then and this is more in the, not necessarily HCI anymore, but this is one project that we did because in the global south or in urban, very dense urban context, no, satellite images, usually the roads are always sorry, in the global south, there's not a lot of information about our roads. No, it's not very easy. For example, in OpenStreetMaps, probably. Okay, but the easiest way to detect roads are from satellite images. So in this project, we wanted to develop an image segmentation model. We trained an image segmentation model so that we can detect the width of roads. Okay, so OpenStreetMaps gives you where the roads are, but it cannot really tell you how wide those roads are. It can tell you the category of the road, whether it's a primary, secondary, tertiary road, but it doesn't necessarily tell you how wide they are. And one reason why we wanted to get the width is because we wanted to use that to estimate how comfortable drivers will be when we direct them to drive on those roads. Because narrow roads are not very comfortable for drivers, but wider roads are comfortable. So we wanted to get that information automatically from satellite images. And then this one, the last project under mobility is WeCycle. So one of the problems that we have in the Philippines is we cannot provide safe cycling routes to new cyclists. So what we did here for this project is we developed a crowdsourcing tool, similar to Strava, so that they can record their trips. Okay. And then one additional thing that we added here is, bikers in the Philippines always record their trips. Like they have these action cameras mounted on their bicycles. So we wanted to leverage on that kind of information as well. So after they record their trips, they can upload their videos to the application, and then the application will figure out how to map parts of the trip that was captured in the video. And that information will be used later on to be shared to other cyclists, no? And that video will also be processed to identify, for example, what parts of the road or the trip had bike lanes. Um, um, and we can also annotate there, for example, what parts of the trip had very aggressive drivers, vehicles cutting bicycle riders on the side. So, and obstructions on the road. So, those are informations that we would like to capture through this application. And then on human-centered health and well-being, this main project actually is focused on, because for Filipinos, for Filipinos, whenever we go to, actually we don't always go to the doctors. That's also one thing. As part of our culture, when we feel something, we don't always go to the doctor. The first person we go to is our mothers. Okay, so we ask our mothers or we ask our parents, something is happening. But most of the time, if you're not well versed in medical jargon, you can't really explain exactly what you're feeling. So, for example, you point at different parts of your body, because you don't really necessarily know what it is, right? But you know it's hurting there. So those are our way of naturally describing what's happening with us. Um, but in telemedicine contexts, when you try to look for doctors, you can't really do that exactly. You have to know, for example, when you go to telemedicine apps, um, number one, you have to either know the doctor that you want to consult with, or you have to know the specialization of the doctor. So I need to talk to an orthopedic or a pediatrician or whatever, right? But for most people in the country, they don't necessarily know the specialist that you need to talk to for the kinds of conditions or that for what you are feeling. So for this specific project, what we wanted to do, we're not trying to diagnose. What we're trying to do is we're trying to provide a way for ordinary people to describe their condition, okay, either by pointing to the different parts of this 3D model, okay. We wanted to capture a video wherein they really do the pointing and extract information from there. But we just used a 3D model at the moment. And then we also use an LLM to actually help the patient describe what they're feeling. So the LLM is just there to ask follow-up questions, not necessarily to diagnose. So the point is we wanted a more natural way for them to describe, even in their local language, not necessarily English. Okay? Because right now, if you notice telemedicine applications in the Philippines, it's always you have to know English and you have to know who you want to talk to. And that's a big barrier for a larger part of our population who don't necessarily speak English and are not necessarily familiar with medical specializations and jargon. So there. And then finally, reimagining the digital sphere. The main question that we try to answer is how might we empower ordinary digital citizens to moderate individually and in communities outside of the platforms? Because where we have given up on assuming that we can always work with the platforms to come up with new solutions. So we're just building solutions outside of the platform, specifically browser extensions. So many of the projects that we're doing under this program is on building browser extensions. One of them is this project that allows you to add citations to YouTube videos. So when you watch YouTube videos, you don't necessarily know where different pieces of information said in the video are coming from. So for this specific tool, you can add citations to YouTube videos. If other users also have this browser extension installed, they can see the citations on their browsers. And then if you're not an expert yourself, but you are questioning or you're not sure whether some parts of the video are actually true or not, you can also request experts to add citations to these parts of the video. So if you are an expert and you're not necessarily on YouTube all day watching different videos related to your field, other people can ask for your help and they can direct you to videos that might need your attention. So that's one example of a solution. And then this one is just moderating trolls in online spaces. So providing tools for people to quickly eliminate um, troll posts and comments on Facebook, for example. Because if we will rely on the reporting feature of Facebook, for example, it might take days before comments and posts are removed. Right now, there are already ways to hide comments, right? But this tool also takes into consideration like if certain comments are reported through the extension several times, then if other people have this extension installed as well, those comments will also be hidden on their view. And then finally, this browser extension also on YouTube tries to pull all of the information related to the content creator of the video so that you can do fact checking faster. Because what we realize is that fact checking, one of the reasons why not many people fact check is because they find it very tedious. Sometimes they don't know where to start to fact check. They don't know where to go to actually check whether this person exists, whether this entity exists. You know? So what we're doing here is we're trying to pull uh, information from different sources. So for example, if you're a content creator, we'll try to see whether this person exists on Facebook, exists on X, LinkedIn, if there is a website tied to this person, and if there is a Wikipedia made for them. So that's just one example. So we pull all of the related links. We also use backlinks. So for this video, are there other videos or are there other pages that link to this video? Because as you know from search engines, now they use backlinks as a way to measure reputation. If many other pages point to you, then it's an indication that you are somehow basically your reputation increases because they're referring to you, they're citing you. So this is just one example of a project that we're doing to make it easy for people to fact check. So before I move on to the next part, which is about teaching, probably I can go through some of the questions. Would that be all right, Dilrush? Yeah, okay. I think, yeah, from Leonie. This might sound naive, but when you say we might need a background in DS, does that include the sound knowledge? Linear algebra. Oh, uh, my background. Is this for as an HCI researcher?
Leonie, if you can unmute and talk, or like you can type if you can.
But as an HCI researcher, if you want to have a background in data science, then yes, then you need some knowledge or a sound knowledge of linear algebra because if you will be training models yourselves or building models yourselves, then linear algebra is uh, one important foundational knowledge. to understand how models work. Also, do we have to be able to make models more advanced than linear regression models? I guess that depends on the task that you are trying to make the models. Um, as I also tell my other students, you don't necessarily have to jump into the more advanced models to actually solve a very simple problem. You can start by trying out simple models first. If they have high accuracy already, then that's more than enough. Not unless the task requires you to train the model using large amount of data and you're having difficulty identifying or determining the right features to use for your model, then probably that's the time you go use a deep learning model because you can just feed the whole data to the deep learning model and then it will do it themselves. You don't have to do all of the feature engineering and all of those things. I mean, since you said we should have a data science knowledge about model. Yes, if you want to do data science, yes, then you need to learn modeling as well because that's one of the tools of the trade. It's not enough that you know statistics. You have to know modeling as well because that's kind of expected these days. I forgot to introduce. How do you ensure accessibility for disabled people? How do we make sure certain people are not offended when they are provided the perfect right? Well, unfortunately for that specific project, we haven't considered yet people with different bodies. Um, so right now the 3D model is just showing a man or a woman depending on the profile. But it's not a digital twin yet. It would be nice if it's a digital twin. Like if it can scan your body so that it's a more realistic representation of who you are. So that when you want to point to different parts of the body, you know exactly where it is. Because the scale might be a little bit different depending on your actual form. Yeah, but that is a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. But just for our project earlier, we just decided to use the typical 3D models out there. In the design phase of such a product, I've heard we have to care about such things. I guess because it's an undergraduate thesis, we have to set the scope because they're supposed to finish this in a year or in less than a year actually. And they, of course, they have to graduate. So we have to set a scope for what we can focus and then probably other things we can work on later. So I guess for the purpose of answering the questions that they had, the research questions that they had for the project, that was more than enough. But definitely accessibility is one thing that we should always consider, especially in telemedicine applications.
If anybody else also have any questions, feel free to unmute and talk. We want to keep this more casual and then move to the, sort of like knowledge sharing as well.
Right. I mean, if you have questions, just send them in the chat. I'll go through them. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. So let's make sure that you type your questions and we'll take it again at the next session or in the, soon after Brian finished the education. Yes. Okay.
All right. So yeah, I mean, if I'm being honest, a lot of the projects done by all of the projects that you see in my slides are actually done by our undergraduate students. One thing you have to also know is that in our university, undergraduate thesis is the expectation is kind of like a master's level thesis, but they're doing it in groups of 4. So they have a lot of brains and hands working on these projects. So yeah, just so you know, they're not individuals working on these and have a larger scope. compared to like a project done by an individual. So yeah. Okay. So how do we teach our students? How do we train our students so that they can do those kinds of research, right? So in the Philippines, we're one of the first universities to really have a dedicated HCI course. And actually, the first person that taught us how to do HCI was Shen Dongzhao from NUS. So they flew to the Philippines, and it was because of TJ, one of our colleagues. So he flew to the Philippines. He gave us um, a workshop on design thinking, actually. So the very first iteration of our HCI course in the university is um, patterned after design thinking. So we were teaching them design thinking, not really HCI that we know today. Okay. But around 2017, we've decided that we're not gonna teach design thinking anymore. Okay. Because design thinking also has its flaws. It has its critiques, of course. Uh, it's more suited for startups because design thinking and for example design sprints, I think that was by Google. um, so they're more catered for startups because of the fast-paced nature of those environments. But if you really want to do HCI research and impactful research for your users, then you need to spend more time understanding their problem and not just going out one day collecting data and then going back to the office and then ideating solutions. So 1 day of data collection with a very convenient sample is never going to be enough to do real HCI research. Um, so we ditched design thinking and instead focused on teaching our students the following. So if you look at our syllabus, we focused on teaching them how to conduct need finding studies, how to do user research, how to do thematic analysis following Braun and Clark, of course. What are the different kinds of interfaces? Because most of our students are only familiar with the window interfaces, for example, or smartphones. So we introduce them to different kinds of interfaces that are also introduced at CHI. So we introduce them that. And also the very new and interesting ones that come out, for example, in Japan. Okay, because Japan is very innovative and very creative when it comes to new interfaces and interaction techniques. We also teach them information design, like information architecture, um, visual design, of course, how to do prototyping properly, and usability tests, how to conduct usability tests. So what's nice about our course is that they also take it alongside their software engineering course. So the more technical software construction, software development lifecycle, all of those things are taught in that course. And the more design methods are taught in our course. So what I always tell my students is in their software engineering course, we teach them how to build things right because they need to follow the process. They have to have the right process. No, they have to learn to reflect to become better software engineers. But in our course in HCI, we're teaching them how to build the right solutions. We're teaching them how to build the right solutions. In software engineering, how to build things right. In our course, how to build the right things. So there. And then another feature of our course that we introduced is the Hall of Fame and Shame. Now, so we realized that it's not enough that we teach them how to design products well. We also have to teach them taste somehow. So the Hall of Fame and Shame is an activity of our students. All of our students are required to submit one entry to our Hall of Fame, which are basically good examples of design, good design examples that they see anywhere. It can be a chair, it can be um, a service or it can be an actual software. So Hall of Fame is about good examples of design, good design examples, and then Hall of Shame are bad design examples. And they have to come up with a write-up that explains why it's a good design, why it's a bad design, and our students are also encouraged to interact with what our students are posting. So it has to be an active participation. When we did this the first time, students were just posting. Nobody's reacting. Nobody's adding to what others have already posted. So what we did recently is we came up with a mechanism so that students will be required to react to other students' posts. Yeah, but in a more natural way. So that's the Hall of Fame and Shame. So this is a term-long activity. So we started around the third week of the term, and then it goes until the 14th week of the term. Right. And then another thing that we introduced in our course is the poster session. Before they were doing final presentations like slides and everything. But then in the past 3 or 4 years, we changed it to a poster session. And this time around, we always invite industry panels to give feedback. So students really like this activity because they don't only hear from us. So they've been hearing from us for the whole 13 weeks. No? And they're more receptive of feedback when it's coming from industry. So that's why we do this. So there could be feedback already coming from us before, but once they hear it from people in the industry, they accept it more. I don't know why. Maybe they need to trust us more. But yeah, so for the industry panel, we actually invite around 9 people because we have a large batch, usually around 300 to 400 students. So we had to recruit many members from the industry, and then we distribute them to different groups. And then finally, what I would like to share, so we also teach ethics in our course, of course. And the main activity that we use for teaching ethics is the Black Mirror Writers Room. So if you have Netflix, you're probably familiar with Black Mirror. So that's one of the series in Netflix, wherein each episode is presenting as a very dystopian future. So it presents a technology, and the whole story is about how the technology can be used for bad things. So it actually the series itself is actually a good material for students because it engages them, okay, or it asks very important questions about how these technologies should be designed and who should be the right people to access those technologies. So for the Black Mirror Writers Room, and this is actually an activity designed by Casey Fiesler. I don't know if you know her, Dilrukshi. She's also in the CSCW space. So,
Yeah, the glasses.
yeah, with the glasses. Yeah, she
Yes.
does a lot of TikTok videos as well in real.
Yes, very informative sessions. Yes.
Yeah. So she shared this activity from her class before, and I kind of adapted it in our classes as well. So in this activity, we ask our students, so they will be in groups, and then we ask them to think of a technology. It can be a technology that is possible in the near future, maybe in 3 or 5 years from now. So it has to be something that it's possible in the next 3 or 5 years. And then they have to come up with more details about the technology, right? And then the activity is really for them to come up with an episode of Black Mirror related to that technology. So they have to come up with a protagonist and then a whole storyline, a plot. So what's interesting about this activity is that it really engages the creativity of the students, especially the more creative ones. So we've had outputs before, especially during the pandemic. So we asked them to really come up with some storyboards. So many of them actually came up with very compelling storylines and some very disturbing ones, of course. But yeah, I think this was a very good ender for our course because we usually do this at the end. Um, so it exposes them to speculative design, so as a method. So it's okay to speculate. Uh, so yeah, and actually that's it. Those are the things that I would like to share, especially on how we teach.
We have a question in the chat actually
Oh,
from Ethel.
I think the future of HCI and the AI is moving from interfaces to relationships, human and AI agents. Yeah, I think I that could be one. Yeah, that could be one. How to build relationships, because the interface right now is just a chat, right? It's a chat interface, and there's not much you can really innovate from there. Um, Besides coming up with new interfaces, and then you're just using the LLM to do certain tasks, like some of our examples here, like this one, like this one. There's no chat interface there. The users are not prompting the LLMs to, because one feature of this one is after they upload an image, we use an LLM to extract keywords from the image. For example, what are the different objects in the image? What is the background, etc., etc. So we use LLMs to actually extract those information from the images so that they can be shown to the users, and then the users can actually choose what elements of the image they really like to be in the final output, right? Especially if that image is just an inspiration. So I like the color, for example, or I like that there is a dog, or I like that the hand is actually about the dog. So those information are extracted by the LLM. So I mean, we can probably still do interfaces like this one, and then the LLMs are just there to perform the tasks for us.
Once
Um,
actually I saw in the Twitter somebody, I think probably it could have been Andrew Cartwright
uh-huh.
say that okay, futures interface is be gone because the markdown will be the language for the interface for agents, right? Like no more HTML
Right.
and then
Yeah.
only the markdown that will be understood by the agent. So that's something.
That is very true. Because right now we're being forced to document everything so that we can teach agents how to do the tasks that we want them to do. So yeah, I mean, but I feel like even though we will move towards human AI interactions more, there is still space for interfaces. Uh, yeah, because you can't always use language as an interface for every single task.
Mm.
Because sometimes your mouth might be busy doing things, and then you need to interact with the computer using your hands. So, but yeah.
Okay, we
But
have another question.
another question is how you do the assessment when there are 800. Okay, sorry. It's not 800, around 300 to 400. And usually they're working in groups. Groups of 4 or 5 students. So the number goes down, and it's not just me. So for the HCI course, also one thing that you have to know about our university is that we have small class sizes. We don't do large lecture classes, like 100+ students in one class. So our class sizes are around 45 students only. So for example, me, I teach 4 sections of students sometimes, no? And then I have other faculty members also teaching the same course, and they have several sections as well. So we actually work in teams, and then we distribute the work so that we can do the assessment more effectively. and efficiently. So yeah, so that's why we also include industry panel for the final one, because um, we need all the help we can. So and we've been seeing their output for the whole term, so there's already a bias. So it's always better to have fresh eyes, looking at their work and then giving them other feedback, because they might already be tired for like what we're saying already. Tired of it. Yeah.
Okay, we have 3 minutes more. I would request if you have any questions, we can discuss at the, until you come up with a question. Maybe I can share um, some news, in the sense like if you were there in the last discussion with Professor Richa, she kind of shared that there will be a internship from IIT Bombay on HCI design aspects, that they will call for participants from from what I heard from her is like she would not only look from India but also from like the region. They are open to it as well. So that's something that you can keep an eye on. And we also, being the Colombo Sikha chapter, we can share information if we get, soon after we get to know. And also, Brian, maybe you can share, take this moment to share upcoming, maybe like, the proposal stage of our summer schools, where the people who are interested here and take, I'm not too sure the crowd here know about summer school. Maybe you can give like a, short introduction to it, and then what things that they can expect in these schools.
Right. Thank you for that, Dilukshi. So Dilukshi did mention earlier that I'm actually the chair right now of the Asian SIGCAI committee. So it's a committee under SIGCAI, composed of Asian researchers or researchers working in Asia. And one flagship project that we have, that we started last year, are the summer. We wanted to organize summer schools that teaches early career researchers, PhD students, master students, and even undergrad students HCI methods, no, basic HCI methods, so that they can perform HCI research themselves, especially if it is something new in their university and there's no faculty who can teach them these skills. So the summer school is actually an ideal venue for them to learn these skills. So it's usually around June, July. So it will happen around June, July this year, depending on the final venue or host. And what is covered in the summer school are basic HCI methods, so qualitative methods, quantitative methods. So it's a mix of lecture and workshops. So we typically invite researchers from across the region who can teach those methods to the participants, and we usually accept around 40, I think 20 to 40 participants from the last one. And what else? It's usually around 3 to 4 days. It can be extended to 5 depending on the number of activities that will be planned out by the hosts. But yeah, and then there's always if you are, if you don't have the money to actually go to the venue, there is subsidy that can be provided for you. Okay. We have yet to decide whether it's gonna be a 100% support or a partial support. But details of that will be shared in the coming weeks or months.
Okay. With that, so yeah, so finally, a few news are yet to come. So keep an eye on SIGCAI chapters, and also if you are not a member of SIGCAI, I would encourage you to be a member. You don't have to be an ACM member to become a SIGCAI member. Just visit sigcai.org, and then there's students membership that you can will not be very expensive, maybe about, I don't know, $20 if I can remember, but feel free to double check that. And yeah, with that, thank you so much, Brian, and for sharing your insightful information on the lab's work and then also the education HCI in your university. It was insightful, actually. It's something that, Jiva also asked the question about 800 students. I know she's being a, academic. That's the problem that we all have in our, classes. Sizes are much bigger than
Yeah, because
we
I
expect.
mean, computer science has become a popular program these days. And our HCI course is a required course in the curriculum. So all CS students are taking it. So I can only imagine it for like other countries in the global south that have larger younger population. So our numbers might be smaller than theirs. Right? So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'll end the meeting for all, and please keep in touch with our official channels, and we'll let you know all the news. Thanks, Brian. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.